While the world is fighting the corona war, there's another war that's brewing, that between the United States of America and China, with China not yielding. I'm being joined by US Congressman Ted Yoho, who's also the lead Republican in the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia, Southeast Asia, and nuclear non-proliferation. Many thanks for joining us here on India Today. Very important and significant developments happening when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic and China not relenting or giving in. In terms of action, Congressman Yoho, what is it that you think the United States of America and the international community can take to bring accountability in this entire pandemic?
Well, I think what we need to do is to hold China accountable, but not just us, the whole world needs to. China is marching around the world and they're taking the pandemic, which originated in China, and they're doing the aggression between China and India. They're doing the aggression in the South China Sea. You see what's going on in Hong Kong. They're making threatening overtures to Taiwan. And this is something the rest of the free world needs to stand up and say, no. They're marching towards a conflict and nobody wants a conflict. But if we get them to change their attitude and the direction they are going economically, we can do that by putting economic pressure on them.
Well, Congressman Yo, you just spoke about economic sanctions. President Trump was just briefing reporters where specific questions were asked on how is U.S. going to take China to task. Are we looking at, given the Foreign Relations Committee that you're a part of, are we really looking at serious sanctions against the Chinese?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we've got mounting sanctions that are escalating. We, on the Foreign Affairs Committee 2 years ago, when the World Security Council voted to put sanctions on North Korea for the nuclear test, all 12 members of the Security Council voted unanimously, yet China and Russia are the ones that aren't holding true to those. And so we've asked the Treasury Department, our Treasury Department, to sanction the big banks of China, their construction bank, their Bank of Agriculture, because those are the ones that are funneling money through North Korea. So what you're going to see is an escalation of that. And with the acts that China has done on Hong Kong, there is this movement, and it'll happen, to remove the autonomous state of Hong Kong that gets the favorable banking regulations and all that. And that is going to go away, and that's going to put more economic pressure on China. In addition, the supply chains from rare earth metals to the vitamins and minerals that go into our livestock feed to the APIs come from China. There is a movement, and it'll be a rapid movement of removing these APIs and the manufacturing that out of China to trusted allies like India, bring them back home here domestically. All that is going to be economic pain on Xi Jinping and the Communist Party.
Well, that's a very important aspect, but we'll touch upon the global supply chain and the economic aspect. But talking about the coronavirus pandemic, now we've seen the WHO and the World Health Assembly where China really tried to arm twist the organization and continues to do so. Is there anything in any way that we're looking at strengthening the World Health Organization in a manner, in a way in which we don't see one country be able to arm twist an entire organization, the manner in which China has done during such a huge global health pandemic?
They really have. They've taken advantage of the WHO and the way they do business. They do business through coercion and intimidation. And that's why President Trump has taken such a strong stand, and we support him to withhold funding until Secretary Tedros steps down, because he placated China. You know, he withheld calling it a world pandemic for 2 weeks. He said that China had it well under control, that they've shared this information, and we know they didn't share the information up front, and we're still not sure they shared the original DNA sequence of that virus. Although there's reports they have, it still is in question. And so until the WHO acts as a body for the whole world, not one country, I think it's wise that President Trump has done that, because we fund it the most. And then for China to put the pressure on the WHO to not allow Taiwan to be a part of the World Health Assembly, which is part of the WHO, is ridiculous because Taiwan has been so instrumental in previous outbreaks, whether it was SARS or MERS. They've come to the table so often to correct this, and China is intimidated by Taiwan, and it's a lack of self-confidence by China. They're afraid of
But
free and open thinking.
But where do you think the United States of America or like-minded countries really failed in getting Taiwan on that WHO event, the annual meeting between amongst all countries? Where do you think we stood lacking in trying to get Taiwan in?
Well, we put in legislation that passed in the House, and it is real close to being signed into law to have Taiwan as part of the WHO. This is something that is just ridiculous that China can intimidate other countries or organizations, international organizations, to put pressure on a country like Taiwan. We also are introducing legislation to call for Taiwan to be recognized as a sovereign, independent nation.
Okay, going back to your earlier response, you said that you're demanding resignation of Dr. Tedros, that he stepped down, else there can be no funding by the United States of America. What we were given to understand was that there was a 30-day notice period that WHO was put on. Is that the case, or are we looking at nothing but Tedros stepping down?
That was the request that President Trump did, and I think that's wise because he has shown a lack of leadership. He's shown a lack of responsiveness, and he has also showed that he can be manipulated and coerced into doing what China wants. And I just think in an organization like that, to have credibility, you need to have somebody that is going to put the organization number one first. And that organization needs to be apolitical. It just needs to focus on the disease and what they're there for. And Tedros has lost that confidence, not just in our country, but other countries around the world. And I think that would be the quickest way to correct that problem, is to have him step down.
Well, the Senate passed a legislation very recently allowing Trump administration to sanction China. Is the Congress also looking at doing making a similar move in the House of Representatives?
Oh, absolutely. From different leaders in the Chinese party. When you look at Xinjiang area, the region where there's the concentration camps, although China calls them re-education camps, the reports that we get, I'm sure it's the same reports that you get, it's people being forced into these camps. They've got armed crematoriums. We've gotten reports from Uyghurs that have gotten out of that area where they were putting people into crematoriums. And if this is true, this is one of the most horrendous acts that are going on in the modern world that rivals Nazi Germany, if this is true. And there's enough reports that would cause other countries around the world to fully investigate this. And if so, I would recommend all ties with China to be cut off until they start playing by the normal standards of the world. I don't expect them to be like the United States. I don't expect them to be like India, but I expect them to be respectful and honor human rights.
Well, that's a very strong statement, Congressman Yoho. The fact that you're saying that all ties should be cut off, but in terms of interdependence, we see a lot of dependence, and that's where I come back to your earlier response on China and the global supply chain. We see a lot of interdependence when it comes to China and the rest of the world. Can the international community, particularly the United States of America, take actions punitive in nature, take actions that can curtail China's moves to the extent that we do not really suffer from the global supply chains being cut off?
I think if we don't do that, we're going to have a stronger China to reckon with. If you go back to the 19th Chinese Communist Party Congress in 2017, Xi Jinping was very forthright and very clear of the direction of China. He stated that the era of China has arrived. No longer will they be made to swallow their interests around the world. And this was the pivotal point. It's time for China to take the world center stage. their philosophy is there cannot be two suns in the sky at one time. One has to be removed. And so they're looking at us as a superpower to get rid of us. And their goal is global dominance economically and in military. Why else would they be building aircraft carriers, five aircraft carriers? Why have they increased their defense spending 6.9%? Their goal is to march around the world. They've claimed ports. They're threatening ports in the Indo-Pacific region. They've got both sides of the Panama Canal, and yet they hide behind developing nation status at the WTO, and we've got legislation to remove them from that. It's ridiculous that they're the second largest economy in the world and they have all those other attributes I just said, and they hide behind developing nation status, and they shouldn't be favored that way anymore.
Well, you make a very important point, Congressman Yoho. Also, the fact that it was only a day ago that President Xi Jinping, during a meeting with the National People's Congress, said that China should prepare for war. How seriously is U.S. looking at that statement?
I think that's something we always look at and we always want to be prepared for. Nobody wants another war. I mean, we haven't had a major conflict like that since World War II. And, there's been relative, I don't want to say peace because there's a lot of conflicts across the globe. I mean, you and China, I know right there, and you've got to deal with Pakistan. And then we have the Middle East that we're involved in. There's conflicts everywhere. But as far as a world war, we've been void of that since World War II. The only thing that is pushing that is an aggressive China. You look at what they've done in the South China Sea. They're threatening the Philippines. They're threatening the nations of ASEAN that have claims to the land there. Look what they're doing in the Arctic. The world agreement was that countries that are contiguous with the Arctic Circle have a claim to that. Well, China is saying, well, we're a near Arctic Circle country, so we have a claim to it. No, they don't. It's the world norm. And then the Philippines sued China when China encroached on the Philippine sovereignty. The Philippines won that case at The Hague at the Court of Arbitration, yet China ignored that. And so yes. At what point do you allow that activity to go on? And if we wait as civilized nations to let China get stronger because they're manufacturing for us in so many realms, and they grow their economy stronger, that makes their military stronger, are we going to get to a point where we can't back up? And so I think that is coming. I think the chess pieces have been played. And I think it's time for the world to relook at this and say, you know what? China is going in this direction, and it's the wrong direction for a peaceful world.
Well, during this pandemic, a lot of countries, a lot of experts, a lot of leaders have been asking one question and trying to assess why is it happening? Why has China opened up so many borders when they should be fighting the coronavirus pandemic, when they should be assisting other countries, when other countries are reeling under this pandemic? We see China and its aggressive posturing only increasing, not just in Taiwan, Hong Kong, like you rightly pointed out, South China Sea, East China Sea, as well as India-China border. What do you think is the rationale, Congressman, behind China's decision to open up so many fronts?
You got to kind of think about why would they do that? I think it falls into the plan that Xi Jinping laid out in that 19th Chinese Communist Party Congress. And it also falls into the 100-year plan of Mao Zedong that he laid out in 1949 to be the global world power. And so I don't want to say they created the virus, but we know it came from the Wuhan province. They didn't act right away, but yet they had Tedros at the WHO saying, oh, they've got it under control. They allowed 5 million people to leave that area, yet they claim nobody in their military has been sick. So that makes you kind of wonder, why is that? Did they know about this virus ahead of time? Do they have a vaccine? I don't know. But those are all questions that have come up in conversations I've had with other people. And then, as you pointed out, they're marching around the world with the South China Sea. They're threatening Taiwan now. They have threatened our country. I've heard their academic admirals say maybe it's time we take out one or two of the United States aircraft carriers because the Americans don't have the stomach to see that many people die. So they're doing very threatening gestures around the world, and I see it escalating. And again, if we don't come together and move those supply chains away, move the trade away from them, they're going to get stronger. But if we do that, it's going to have them to have to do a reset and rethink the direction they're going. We'd love to welcome into the peaceful world, but we're not going to be subservient to China.
Well, there are a lot of questions and they need answers. We need answers from China as well. Now, in terms of an investigative team, a probe that Dr. Tedros was talking about, is the United States of America looking at an investigation or a probe wherein people from outside would be allowed inside China to go and to partake in the investigations? And in that, will the United States of America push for its own team to be there in that and be a part of that entire probe?
You're talking about the pandemic, right? Coronavirus.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and we've offered that from the get-go with the CDC. We offered our people to go over there immediately, and China rejected that. They kept rejecting it. There has been some work there between the two, but again, when you look at what China did, they withheld PPEs, not just from our country, but countries around the world to benefit China. And so this is a danger of the supply chains being there, obviously. And that's why I've talked to your ambassadors about moving supply chains to India and other like-minded allies of ours, that we have the same philosophy in life. We're going to, when we're going through something like this, we all have to come together to work. We can't say, well, we're not going to give you that stuff because my side's more important. We're all in this together, and we need to come together on that.
Right. Before I let you go, just two questions, a couple of questions. One is to do with Hong Kong. Two important legislations in Hong Kong that are being placed: the National Anthem Bill, which will force Hong Kongers to respect the Chinese anthem. And the second is the national security legislation, which will put Hong Kong under the Chinese administration, whether they like it or not. It is going to be passed. Yeah, President Trump says there are going to be some tough action against China. He didn't spell it out, but is the Foreign Relations Committee looking at what those actions are going to look like from the US against China?
Absolutely. And it's, you saw Secretary Pompeo say, I think it was today or yesterday, and this is something we've talked about. If China goes down this road and breaks that commitment between the leaders of Great Britain and China in 1997 to allow Hong Kong to be an autonomous run region, then what's going to happen is you're going to see sanctions going on people of China that are pushing this. You're also going to see the special administrative state and the agreements we have with Hong Kong of the ease of doing business with the United States, that'll go away immediately. And so Hong Kong, or China again, is pushing in a direction that they shouldn't. And I think everybody is in agreement. Hong Kong is part of China. It's a province of China. There's no debate about that. But what is being subverted is the rule of law and the agreement that were made between those two countries in 1997. And so this is the narrative that comes out of it. The Chinese government, the Communist Party, and Xi Jinping cannot be trusted. And they're bringing shame again on the Chinese culture that will rival the 100 years of shame. And Xi Jinping and the Communist Party are doing this, and it's going to fall on the Chinese people. And this is something we need to think about.
Also, would there be a counter with Scott Perry's proposal of declaring Tibet an independent state? Is that also part of the counter move against China?
It is. I mean, that's something that he's introduced that bill. We'll probably more than likely co-sponsor that bill. Again, it's China marching on people that are free thinking. And this is the one thing with Hong Kong. The people of Hong Kong have experienced freedom and liberty over the last 50, 60 years, 70 years. China and the Communist Party have never experienced that freedom and liberty. So they don't know what it feels like. The people of Hong Kong, the people of Tibet have experienced freedom and liberty, and China's trying to take that away, and you can't do that. It's like trying to prevent an oak tree, an acorn. When you plant an acorn, you can't tell it it's not an acorn or an oak tree. It's going to grow and it's going to become what it is. And China's trying to say, no, you're not an oak tree. You're a weeping willow tree, and it's not going to work.
Right. And finally, before I let you go, an issue that has become big news here in India, it has to do with the India-China border skirmish and President Trump offering to mediate or arbitrate. We know that China is not going to accept it. India continues to maintain that any issue between India and any other country, that's a bilateral border issue, will be solved bilaterally and there can be no third-party intervention. But the larger perspective, what do you think, where is the offer really coming from to mediate from President Trump, and your reading of the India-China border situation?
Well, I think what you see with President Trump is he is so used to negotiations. He's offering his expertise in that. And as you said, it's ultimately going to be between India and China. And we're here to facilitate any way we can. And I know President Trump feels the same way on that.
Right. And in terms of the larger perspective of the India-China border situation and the way China has been carrying out its activities on the other side of the border?
Yeah, I mean, China's been doing that with you guys for, years, decades. And they keep pushing that. And this is what China does, is they push until there's resistance and they come back. We just don't want that to escalate where lives are lost in large numbers. I mean, any life lost is a tragedy, but for them to keep pushing that, because what's happened over the course of the last 30 years, China went from a big, clumsy adolescent child to a very strong and wealthy person. And they don't know the power they have, and they're testing that. And until there's resistance, they're going to keep pushing forward, as you've seen in the East Sea, in the South China Sea, and what they're doing around the world. And it's, again, if we allow this behavior to go on for another 3 to 5 years, my question to world leaders, are you going to be able to turn China back? Are you going to be able to get them to back off? And if we don't act today, is it going to be possible in 5 years from now?
Right. On that note, Congressman Ted Yoho, many thanks for joining us here in India today. It was indeed a pleasure.
Thank you, Geeta. Take care.